that last bit is particularly important for older people. Cohousing is an ideal arrangement for older people. And I think the present times with COVID lockdowns show that preeminently. There are so many lonely older people in this country, so many older people living alone, so many people who don't have children, who are locked up in their individual homes and suffering quite a lot at the moment. So we saw the OWCH group, Older Women's Co-Housing Group, came together to anticipate that state of affairs, not quite the extreme state of affairs that we've got with COVID, and to build their own co-housing community together on a model that I had researched in Holland. This was in the days at the end of the 90s, before CLTs had come aboard, before there was any kind of regional infrastructure like Hampshire Hub to support people's initiatives. We were working in a relative vacuum, also I might say in a relative hostile setting, because local authorities, planners, housing associations all thought they knew what to do for the old and they ought to be pleased with it. And we didn't agree with them. So they didn't recognize the value of co-housing. Some of them are still having difficulties with that, which is why it took us a very long time. About 5% of the UK housing stock is accessible, fully accessible for the needs of old age. 5%. So what we set out to build, next slide please, was something that would suit everybody right to the end of their lives, so they wouldn't have to move again. No stairs that they couldn't manage, a lift, wide corridors, large spaces, airy rooms, where you could be cared for if you needed to be, age-proofed. As a movement, I mean, we're the only senior co-housing group so far. Others have not sort of labeled, badged themselves according to age yet. We offer, I think, a splendid solution to the housing market, in the sense that there are so many older people who are in houses that their families have left and that are now too big for them. So releasing homes for families is also part of a move towards co-housing, in my view. But most importantly, I think, and I referred to it earlier, is what senior co-housing represents: a body of people who live according to certain values which you manage and control yourselves, is an antidote to the institutional ageism that pervades British culture, in my view. Practically all the women in OWCH would say we did not want either to end up lonely like my mother did, or we do not want to go into an old age home or a care home where somebody tells us what to do, where somebody shapes our day, and where we are infantilized and patronized rather than being active agents of our own lives. So that's how we see co-housing: the means to be an active agent for our own life in old age as we get older. And the culture is really very unreceptive to it. Now, the slide you're looking at is photographs from the workshops with the architect that the women took part in when we had found a site in High Barnet. It was an old school, obsolete. A housing association bought it for us because we couldn't really raise the finance to do that for ourselves. And we worked with the architects to plan the buildings according to what we wanted, and also to design in the features that we reckon co-housing needs, like circulation areas where you meet people extremely easily, where you're not faced by corridors of front doors and nobody else, nothing. So the whole building is designed for people to meet each other easily, which has been a slight problem in COVID, because when you're trying to keep a social distance, it's a bit of a contradiction in terms. But that's us in the architect's practice. And next slide is the sketch of, have we got on to the next slide?
Oh, sorry, Maria. Yeah, Union Street.
Yeah, this is the site of the old school. With we demolished the buildings on it. It's on a Victorian one-way street, just off 2 minutes from the high street in High Barnet. Absolutely wonderful for the shops, the banks, the buses, etc. But still quite quiet. And that whole street is Victorian cottages. And we the architects tried to mimic that a little bit while not being totally too pastiche. So next slide, please.
Yep.
So that's the sketch, and it actually looks pretty like that. So it's a right-angled building around a lovely big garden with actually an allotment on the side of it that by some accident of fate can't be built on. So we've got a vegetable garden as well as a main garden there. Next slide, please. The women themselves had quite a lot of say and visited, not as much as they would have liked, the building site, and kept an eye on things, and were able to express certain preferences in their own flats. Although we tried very hard to keep discipline in the whole group, because there's nothing worse for builders and developers than having, you know, potentially 26 women ringing them every morning to say she changed her mind on the day before. Also, you know, everything being customized costs money. So if you want a different kind of bathroom, that means that the builder can't get economies of scale and things get held up. We learned from the community project in Sussex that you cannot go for 27 different kinds of door knocker. It's not economic. So we have to constrain people's choice. So the next slide is, Mags, is the result of our planning, which is a lovely environment. There, what we have there is 25 flats for 26 women, a mix of mostly 1 bed and 2 beds, but some 3 beds, a common room, a laundry, a car park, a guest suite, and it's mixed tenure. So 2/3 are leasehold and 1/3 is social rental. And we work with a small partner housing association who is the landlord for those 8 flats. There is absolutely no distinction in the community itself between who is a tenant and who's a leaseholder. Everybody has the same rights, the same say. You just wouldn't notice, and we've forgotten who's what anyway. So one of the things I wanted to impress on everyone this morning is that because co-housing is dedicated to building a sense of community, that doesn't happen just by accident. It doesn't happen spontaneously. It can gradually over the years work quite well just by seeing the same people all the time. But for a co-housing community to really work well and to work as well as the one in High Barnet does today, it needs consciously adopting means of gelling the group and building group solidarity. That is a lovely building. When people come to visit it, which they do a lot, or they did before COVID, what we keep saying to them is the physical architecture is great. It's the social architecture that makes the difference here. It's the social architecture that makes this place stand out. This is older people running their own lives and not having things done unto them, not having their lives run for them. This is people in charge of their own lives. We in High Barnet have a lot of almshouses and sheltered housing around us. They're all very dependent on somebody to run them. And they've got all sorts of rules, like you can't have guests overnight, and you can't have pets, and you can't have this, and you can't have that. In OWCH, in New Ground, the rules are made by the group itself. So one of the things that has struck me looking at the development of the regional advisory hubs around the country, and I think this has been noted by other people, is that the advisors mostly are focusing on the technical side of finding a site, putting the money together, getting planning permission, finding an architect, all that kind of stuff, somewhat to the neglect of what it is in co-housing you would be aiming for as the end result, which is not just a building, but the social architecture, a group that works and is functional. So years ago, I asked a Dutch co-housing group whether they had any advice for other groups and wish they had done something and they hadn't done it. And they said, oh yes, we spent far too much time and energy looking at the technical side of our co-housing community without giving enough attention to building the social entity that was going to inhabit this building. So we got a building, but then we were fairly nonplussed when we moved in because we hadn't taken any care to build, to talk about the way of life that we wanted, the values we wanted to live by, how we wanted to relate to each other, and that kind of thing. So paying more attention to the soft social stuff is actually an investment. Setting up a co-housing community is difficult enough without it all going pear-shaped when you actually move in, where you find that you don't actually like each other and you've got no agreements on how you're going to live. And then you've got to start from square one. What's coming out shortly from the UK Cohousing Network is something, as a part one of a study on co-housing community coaches. Having noted that the team building, decision-making, conflict resolution, etc., are elements that are relatively neglected in the development process of co-housing groups among advisors, etc., who are focused, quite understandably, I suppose, on the technical, because it's so difficult. Those skills are neglected. And there's all that attention to bricks and mortar, but the most important aspect of the human relationships is forgotten. So this UK Cohousing Network report, Cohousing Community Coaches, is about encouraging and promoting an enabling role among advisors to would-be co-housing groups around the country. Now, looking back on the OWCH group, I would say that, I mean, to be quite honest, we had a long time to prepare to move in, more than many groups do. But we used that time to good effect. The group met for a day a month regularly in the same place, a large hall where they could break into small groups, have lunches, have parties, that kind of thing. And set up over time a way of running those meetings which felt inclusive and which built social solidarity among them and a cohesiveness around the goals that the group shared. We had to deal, as all groups do, with the initial churn. When you're starting a group, you've got more and more people coming, every meeting you have, new people, new faces, more damn fool questions that were asked last time, and you are repeating yourself all the time. And it is a big time waster, but it's an inevitable stage of forming a new group. At some point, you've got to be able to coalesce values and wishes in the group to say, that's what we're going to go for. Anybody who doesn't want to go for it now, leave, go and do your own thing. Especially when you've got a site, you've got to say, who's going to go and live there? Who wants to live there? Who is committed to it? And everybody else should move on and do their own thing. So that's what I call churn. Quite difficult. It's like crowd control, really. I mean, if you get up to 30, 40, 50 people coming into meetings all the time, dealing with them is quite an art. And you have to consolidate a structure and a process in order to move on and make any progress. The larger the group is, the more difficult it is. So in terms of what the group then learned to do just over time, I mean, pretty basic things. And I've been to meetings of would-be co-housing groups where people didn't even know each other's names. yet, where they all sat in rows, so they looked at each other's backs, not their faces. Basic things like that. Start in a circle, make sure everybody's name is known. We developed a system where we would have a greeter for every meeting, especially for those who came late. We put tags on people, legible names. We always gave new people an opportunity to introduce themselves, say why they'd come, and that kind of thing. And we allocated them a buddy, someone in the group who would look after them, make them feel at home, etc. It's quite difficult for some people to come into a large group and feel at ease. We had a load of workshops in the group, all sorts of workshops facilitated by ourselves or by somebody we hired in. We had a lot on inclusiveness and diversity. We had workshops on our core values and agreed to those, and everyone has to commit to them, actually renew their commitment every year, even now. Move on. Yeah. Mags, you can probably get on to the next. Yeah, leave it there.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. The workshops developed things like our conflict resolution policy, which was written in for everybody to abide by. We had workshops on what is mutual support and what is it not. What can people expect if they come into this group? If they come in expecting us to look after them, forget it. We will look out for people. And that's really, really helpful to have helpful, nosy neighbors who will notice if you don't get up one morning. But we don't look after people. People have to be self-sufficient or able to arrange their own care. So we use that time to develop those policies, which we review every now and then, and which act as a set of rules for the group to live by. We also had quite a lot of training on consensus decision making. But it wasn't all work, loads of fun. If there's nothing more tedious than going along to business meetings every month, month after month, and it being grim and work oriented. We had fun, we had great social meals, they were always a feature of the group. We would get up in the middle of the meeting and dance the conga all the way around the hall just to get everybody moving. One of the exercises that one of our founder members was keen on was getting us all to hold hands in a circle, put a hula hoop over somebody's arm, and everybody had to wriggle through it without leaving go hands. Now, watching a group of old ladies do that is quite funny, I can tell you. We had all sorts of getting to know you workshops. I used to run one where we put up huge sheets of paper for every decade of somebody's life, and they had to write on there something significant that happened to me in that decade, and be prepared to talk about it with the group. And it was very, very interesting. Ran that quite a few times, and were able to hear about people's experience as refugees from the Holocaust, or people's refugee experience from Iran more latterly, and to understand a little bit more about the backgrounds of people. So 4 years on now at New Ground, has that all paid off? Yes, it has in spades. It doesn't mean that it's a perfect community. By the way, I don't live there. That's what you can see here is behind me is my home in West London. It's not a perfect community. There never is such a thing. There will always be people who don't agree with the main thrust of everybody else's agreements. There will always be people who take a different view on things and can be awkward. But there also in 25, 26 women, there are a huge array of skills, interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, practical skills. So-and-so, my internet's gone, what do I do? Or I've got a leaking pipe, can somebody help? Or send an email around to say, my glasses have come to pieces, I can't see well enough to mend them. Can somebody come round and do it? And it happens. In the lockdowns, the experience has been very difficult, but a different kind of difficult than most older people are experiencing. What I do is compare it with how those 26 women would have been before they moved into new ground, all living alone, scattered around London. They would be lonely as hell. And if they knew their neighbors, that was a bonus. It would be a bonus. But so many people don't. In lockdown, the group has laid down rules. The common room is not used for their communal meals anymore. They have to social distance everywhere. They have devised all kinds of things, like they started a memoir writing group on Zoom that one of them ran. They've got theatre and film appreciation discussion groups on Zoom. So Zoom has been a boon. They have done, individuals have done bulk ordering of food and supplies for women who haven't been able to get out. They've done keep fit down in the car park, all 2 meters distance, with somebody on a television telling them what to do, keep fit exercises. They've had parties and cocktail parties out on the lawn, all 2 meters distant. So they have really made up for the deprivations of lockdown, but it's still lonely for individuals. Some of them can form bubbles. And they've had the elected management committees had to lay down rules, because there are some very vulnerable people in the community, and there are people there in their 50s who go in and out. Therefore, a source of possible infection. So all the banisters and handles and rails and everything sanitized twice a day. There's a rota for it. So they've made the best of lockdown, and they've now, the ones in their 80s, the age range is about 56 to 92, by the way. The ones in their 80s and 90s have now had their first injection, thank goodness. And there looks to be light at the end of the tunnel. But the co-housing model has proved its value over and over and over again in this group. As I said, it's not full of angels. It's not full of paragons of virtue. It has the normal fallouts and spats and quarrels and disagreements of any human group. But there is real social glue underpinning it. And that social glue was, to mix my metaphors a bit, built prior to moving in. When at the end of 2016, all the women who moved in there, each knew her neighbors already. Mutual support is a huge value that everyone commits to. So you don't have to like each other, you don't have to love each other, you have to respect each other and be willing to be helpful. And there have been numerous illnesses in the 4 years, and people and women have had enormous amounts of help and support. Taken to the hospital when they need to be, taken to outpatients, their prescriptions fetched for them. Meals appear on the doorstep if somebody's sick. People's pets are looked after, plants are watered. It has really made a big difference from where they all lived before. And the pity of it is that there aren't more co-housing communities like this in the whole country. It's something that local authorities are slowly beginning to recognize as a value and an investment for society, for goodness sake. Loneliness doubles your risk of dementia, research has found. Now, dementia is one of the biggest drains on the health service, apart from COVID at the moment, one of the biggest drains on the health service, on health and social care as well. It is an investment if local authorities would facilitate these kinds of self-managing, self-supporting social groups instead of what we've got, which is, isolation for so many older people. So the UK Co-housing Network exists to support people's initiatives in all these measures, and there are new groups coming up. There's a new group in Cambridge, the Marmalade Lane lot, which isn't particularly an older group. There's one in Colchester in Cannock Mill group in Essex, which is an older group, but not necessarily, they just happen to be. And then there are groups coming up in Manchester and places like that of older people wanting to take their own lives in their hands and form a co-housing community together. So the last slide gives the website address of OWCH, Older Women's Co-housing. And on that website, you can find a couple of films that we had made. So it's the last one there. Whoops, that's it. That's our website. If you want to read any more about us, you can read it there. We've tried to pack it with as much information as we can. And there's a couple of films that you can see from the early days of living in New Ground. So there we are. I'm happy to answer any questions.